So we're looking at color correction. It's a really big subject, far too big to handle in one video, and I want to try and keep this video as short as possible. So what I've done is I've created this little flowchart just to help you understand the color correction process. So normally what would happen is you would open your image in Photoshop, and the very first thing you will do is duplicate your background and turn it into a smart object. So you're working non-destructively. It means that all the things that you do to that duplicate layer will be editable later and not a permanent change to the pixels. That's a good thing to do. Then you're going to analyze your image. So using something called the histogram, you're going to look at the light distribution and the color distribution in the image to help you make some decisions about what you want. Now, there's no right or wrong here. It depends on the image, it depends on what you want, and it depends on your taste. But the histogram helps you to read in a more graphic way the pixel distribution of light and color. That's also quite important because sometimes your screen can't be trusted. If you're sitting in an office that has too much light, you might not get an accurate reading from your screen. So the histogram helps you make some decisions. Then you do a primary correction. So the primary correction is the overall improvement of the image in terms of its light and its color. So does it need more contrast? Does it need to be brighter? Does it need to be darker? Do the colors need to be more saturated, less saturated, and so on? So primary corrections are normally split into three possibilities in Photoshop. Image adjustments, which are individual adjustments, specific things like brightness and contrast, levels or vibrance. Those are specific tools that allow you to adjust that one specific thing. And if you have made your object, your layer a smart object, it's all going to be done non-destructively. Adjustment layers are a slightly different way of applying adjustments because it's a layer that contains the adjustment and it will work on all layers below it, or you can clip it to one particular layer. Now, if you've made your layer a smart object, it's a little bit redundant to work with adjustment layers unless you are wanting to do secondary adjustments, but they're there if you need them. So adjustment layers, and then the camera raw filter, which is my choice because the camera raw filter is kind of a one-stop shop. It's like a little mini Lightroom inside Photoshop that allows you to do everything non-destructively as a smart filter. So that would be where I would go for my primary correction. Once you've done your primary correction, you then, not always, but sometimes might need to focus on specific areas that need special treatment. So here you might identify a particular thing that needs more saturated color or some kind of sharpening or brightening and so on. So normally a secondary correction would involve, first of all, making a selection, then usually applying some kind of layer mask if you need to, or even copying it into another layer. That's a technique that I use a lot, is I select what I want to change, put it in a new layer, make it a smart object so that I can then apply whatever adjustments I want to it, and it's a separate entity that I can then blend with the original layer and adjust the opacity. It gives me more control. So I'll show you an example of that shortly. So layers, adjustment layers, and then within Camera Raw is something called an adjustment brush, which allows you to paint over certain areas and adjust those specifically. So I'll show you how that works as well. All right, so that's just an overview of the color correction process. So let's get stuck in. So I have supplied you with some photos in the color correction zip file, which you can play around with. These are all my photos, and these are all the uncolor corrected versions. So this photo shows a very dramatic, bright, colorful sky at sunrise, but the city is very dark. And if I wanted this to be more of a sunrise with the details of the city showing, I would need to do some color correcting. So the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this background layer. So right click, duplicate layer. And what I'm also going to do is take that duplicate layer and I'm going to move it over and go image, reveal all. Okay, so now I have a background here, which I'm going to call before, and a copy called after. So I'm working on the after one. Then I'm going to convert this to a smart object. Right click, convert to smart object. That means everything that I do to this layer will now be non-destructive. So I could go to image adjustments, and I have all of my adjustments here that I can go individually into to make changes. So just to give you an example, if I go to levels and I adjust the midtones here, you can see that when I say OK, it comes in as a smart filter, which means I can turn it off and on. So I'm just going to undo that. And the other thing I can do is apply an adjustment layer. So here we have adjustment layers where I can do pretty much similar things to the image adjustments here, except they come in as an adjustment layer. So if I go here and I go the same place, levels, you can see it comes in as a layer above. I can make the same adjustments, but you can see it's affecting all layers below. If I wanted to just affect the immediate layer below, I hold down Option or Alt, move between the two and click to clip that adjustment layer to just this layer here. So an adjustment layer is usually used more for secondary adjustments, but I'm going to undo that and remove it. And then finally, we have our camera raw filter, which is under filters, camera raw filter. But before I do any of that, I need to analyze this photo. So I'm going to go to my histogram here. You can find it under Window, Histogram. And I'm going to go here to Expanded View. And then I want to look at luminosity. So luma is light in Latin. So we're looking at the distribution of light here. And we can see that on the far left side are blacks. On the far right side are whites. Next door to blacks are shadows. Next door to whites are highlights. And in the middle is exposure or midtones. So we can see that this image is dark because the pixels are distributed more towards the blacks and shadows. And there's a peak of blacks here, which would be explained by the city area. So this is telling me the story of light in this image. It's a very dark image. I can then drill down to individual colors and see how those are distributed, red, green, and blue, or I can look at the colors overall, and I can see that there's a lot of red in the highlights and midtone area, and that would be the sky. So I'm happy with that. I don't want to change that. So your histogram will be different for each image. There's no right or wrong histogram. It depends on what the image is and what you want to get from the image. But this confirms what I'm seeing, which is that this is a dark image and we need to lighten up certain areas. Okay, so I'm going to close the histogram, and now I'm going to go and do my primary correction. So I'm going to go up here to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and you can see that it's got these categories: light, color, effects, curve. Now I'm not going to go through all of these because it's going to take too long. I'm just going to show you an example of how you can do a quick primary correction. So I'm going to start with light. I'm going to increase the exposure, but what I don't want to do is ruin the sky. So I'm just going to push the exposure up a little bit. I normally take my contrast up quite high, and then I take my highlights down to compensate for the increase in exposure so that there's no blown out pixels. I'm going to take the shadows up a bit to bring out some of the detail here. I'll leave whites where they are and take blacks down a little bit. I'm also going to go to color, and I'm going to bring the vibrance down a little bit, just so that the sky doesn't look so fake, even though it really was that color. And I'm going to increase the temperature so it looks like a nice warm sunrise. Under effects, I'm going to increase clarity and texture a little bit. Okay, and if I click on this button, I can see before and after. And okay, so now I have a camera raw filter applied to that after layer, and there's a definite improvement, but I'd still want more detail to come out in the city. So this is where I need to think of how am I going to approach it. Now I could go back to camera raw, and I could use an adjustment brush. So here's adjustment, and I'll choose brush, and I'll just brush over this area, and making sure auto mask is on. and then I can increase the exposure. Okay, that's an adjustment brush. I don't like to do that. It's just my personal preference. So what I would rather do is make a selection of the dark pixels in this image and put that in a new layer. So I'm going to go to, I'll hide the before. I'm going to go select, color range, shadows. And then I'm going to make an adjustment here so that I get just the city shadows. And then OK. And then I'm going to make a copy of that to a new layer. So Control or Command J. And you'll see that I now have that city on its own layer. And then I'm just going to call this secondary. And I'm going to make it a smart object so that whatever I do to it is non-destructive. Now I can go to Camera Raw, but what I'm actually just going to do is go to Image, Adjustments, Levels. And here I can start making some adjustments to the brightness. And I can even overcook it a bit. Because it's on its own layer, I can turn down the opacity of that. So I'm going to go a bit extreme here. Okay, and then I can go to my blending modes and I can choose, say, screen, and then just adjust my opacity down till I get something that's a more sellable version. And maybe I think lighter color is better. Okay, so now I've got a decent lightening of the city area without it looking too processed. So if I now show the before and after, you can see that clearly now I have brought out the lightness of the city. This is, I think, a better result. So that's the process I would go through. So practice with it. There's no right or wrong. It's really just about finding a workflow that works for you in terms of color correction. Photoshop has a ton of tools that help you with doing the correction that you want for a specific situation. So play around with the photos that I've given you to play around with and see if you can come up with improvements. And it's always a good idea to see a before and after.